It's important to bring these languages into this space, into all of us. A very warm welcome to this symposium today. We have a really exciting lineup of protagonists of different parts of the world, different indigenous communities and thinkings that will bring us important dialogues and knowledges that relate very much to this exhibition and to the situation today. I'd like to introduce Mari Sombi, who is going to talk to us about her forthcoming book on the Alta Action. And I will introduce other speakers as they come to the day, but I will just remind you that after Mari we'll have the scholar Irene Snarby and the curator and scholar Megan Tamati-Quenel. We will also be hearing the scholarly words of Anya Mangaugan, and we will move on to Paulina Fjodorov and to Sara Marielle Gaup-Beaska and Eva Maria Fjellem. Then we will have a coffee break, and then we will finish off the day with discussions introduced by the artist Nabil Ahmed and his colleagues, legal colleagues, Fadja Shouen Karwa and Veronica Korman, and our very special guest today, Mama Josefa Alomang, who is 80 years old. So it is a special privilege that she has made this incredible effort to travel the entire world to be with us. And we will also hear Marcus Haluk and Andrew Hickman. So without further ado, I'd like to ask you to give a very warm welcome to Mari Sombi.
Blessed be. Do I have my mic on? No. Blessed be all this audience as we honor our directions, our Mother Earth, Gaia, our Creator, the Sun. Yeah, I'm in fact going to talk more about shamanism today than about the Alta Project book, but I assume it will be part of it. So I'll have to greet you all. Berbavi buhkaida. Wow, 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 wow. According to Mama's tradition. My name is Marie Ailuneide Zombie. And I have to say that I always have to fight for my middle name, Ailuneide. It's always reduced to an A because it's a hassle to write Ailuneide. So they just put an A or totally skip it. This name has been given to me by Nilsa Shakvalkiaba Ailuhash, my great companion, my best friend in life, and my teacher too. He taught me many things, for example, on how to read the mountains. And we traveled so much together. And this name he gave me, he said, "You are not Aslaksdatter, you are Ailuneide." And that name has certain codes in that because Ailu was a shaman as well. Just so that nobody tries to skip my name anymore with that Ailuneide and try to honor that together with me. So the subject for me is the Sami shamanism. And it has been told to me that the Sami spirituality and its magic, that they knew some law in ancient texts. I have read that the Sami shamans knew the laws of nature so well that they could practice weather control. For example, create storms. In many hundred years, they were able to keep the intruders from coming by creating storms. And in some other textbooks, I have read that the Sami shamans would be able to walk on water. There would be coastal Samis. People would be on small boats in the fjords, fishing, and here comes a bunch of Sami shamans walking on the water. So people would just throw the fish away to them, I guess in order to applaud them, to honor them. And they would pick up the fish and walk back to land and have lunch. This spirituality was very well known and deeply, highly respected in Europe. It was not only the Naidi, the practicing shaman, who would use a drum, but every family had their own drums, and they would use for weather predictions, for example, like turning on your weather channel, and other more daily questions. Every family would also have their own sacred seidi connected to their residence where they were living. Our belief is and was Everything in the nature is filled with soul. It's besouled. The gods are very close to the humans, and you can stay in touch with them. You can communicate with them and be connected with them. They'll give you advice, and maybe you even could have parties with our gods. That's a beautiful thing I like to think about. But as the land gets mapped, King Christian IV of Denmark demonized the whole Sami culture with the Catholic Church, and their main target in order to get to the land is Sami spirituality. To own a drum, to yoik, which is the traditional Sami singing. We have excellent performers here from that. I'm sorry I couldn't do my shaman yoik because my throat is not all that well today. It was forbidden by law to bow to a Seidi, which is the sacred place, power place. The Sami names got forbidden, and the very few that are restored. That's kind of how we all have kind of normal names, but there are very few restored names from that. So very few. The color yellow got forbidden because it was connected with the sun, our sacred life force, as we are the children of the sun in our mythology. And the Sami shamans got doomed. Everything from beheading and to be set on fire alive, to be burned alive. That's a very sadistic and cruel deeds to do. And they were burned alive with their drums. As well as the drums would also be looted and sold world around. So we can, for example, find original Sami shamanic drums in the Museum of Mexico, for example. I think it's a Natural Geographic Museum in Mexico. So the 1600th century, they mapped the land. Colony plan is to populate the area to create more taxpayers. So Christian IV, King of Denmark, can finance wars at the continent. So they want people to move into Sami land. One of the problems is that people are very, very scared of Sami spirituality, and so they keep burning the shamans in order to kind of clean the land. So the colonizers who were they were doomed people in Denmark. I mean, they were to be killed, but instead the king gave them mercy and sent them up to the north, up to Finnmark especially. This communicates, it's just like the attack in 1644 at holy mountains called Nasa, where silver is found. those money were used from Sweden to buy up Native American land in America. So it's funny how this goes. They attack one indigenous people in order to be able to ruin another indigenous people. Nasa Mountains are again under big attacks. This time it's a mineral needed in the computer industry that's causing this mega attack, and they're the Chinese. I mean, our government has thrown us to the Chinese, and they will, the ILO Convention 169 will not be in charge. So the Chinese the Scandinavians they have been kind of clever. They have sold us to the Chinese, and so they can just come and brutalize us and take whatever they want from, in that Nasa Mountain case. So they demonize the Samis for living in peace with the nature, where everything has a soul. Everything is sacred and are to be used with care and gratitude. Everybody is using a drum for weather checkups, like checking, switching on your weather app, or listening to the weather predictions. And that's the everyday shamanism. The Naidi would be the one who goes in trance and travels and journeys. And this is happening while everyone is going crazy with the churches. The churches are throwing mind control and committing mega property looting on everyone. The mind control hit us in the beginning. In the beginning, there were much resistance. In modern society, bringing shamanism to the table is to decolonize your mind and learn to trust and love yourself as well as you love your land. But the still open shamanism in Sápmi is very uninstrumental. To be actively involved in and officially letting others call you Naidi or shaman, because you kind of can't do that yourself. I mean, others has to name you a shaman. It's not many indigenous cultures around the world has been able to keep that spirituality much more intact than we have. And it's not so strange, because you are considered crazy if you are a shaman. No idea. And it's true too. Some initiations are so hard that you will lose your mind. You will become crazy, and because you have to let go of all illusions and to see it all. So it's helpful for people to learn that they can practice everyday shamanism, that it doesn't have to go to that Naidi stage all of the time, where you get crazy and very hard initiations. But it's very possible to And for me, it was a very bitter period when I knew that I had this strong shamanic genes, and when things started to happen, that there was no spiritual tribe there. For me, there were no elders to tell me what was going on. They were all Christianized and had locked their souls behind the bars. But as I was trying to say, everyday shamanism is okay. That means giving thanks to Etni Enan, Mother Earth, Gaia, being as loving and kind as you can, being authentic, being yourself in the best way you can, and taking care of yourself, accepting yourself, giving rays of sunlight and acceptance and love to others as well as to yourself. This is very, very essential in every esoteric belief. You can't save the world before you have saved yourself. You are stuck before you have saved yourself, before you are able to love yourself, to accept yourself, and to forgive yourself, and not blame yourself, and to integrate all of that into your own being. Since our land and most indigenous people's lands and our way of living, our tribeness are so threatened, then it's time to start to investigate who earns money on the misery. Follow the money. Me and my elders, we have got to learn that there is an occult group of 1% that controls the whole Earth, planet Earth. They operate in deep, deep secrecy. And it looks like that the whole of this Norwegianization, this assimilation processes, these constant attacks are carried out, for at least 500 years for our part. They are carried out by the same psychopaths, the same programming threatening people to believe that whatever they carry out and directing people to believe in what they want you to believe in by the help of media, they are not just after us, the indigenous peoples. In the same it's the same story with all the rest of humanity that don't belong to the 1% elite of malevolent control, whose religion is based on creating Armageddon on this planet Gaia. Lately they have desperately been trying to create World War III in order to have an excuse to use nuclear weapons and bomb and wipe out 90% of all of the world's population. They do this by controlling media. They have total control over all the religions, the churches. They poison foods and waters, and basically making everybody sick. And the medical industry is like totally in their hands, like everything else. So it's very, very important that we wake up and we know who this elite, this cabal is. And they are very, very dangerous people, psychopaths. After Standing Rock, we really had to realize that they want to kill us. They are after to kill us. Before we thought that, oh yeah, well, bad things happen to us and so and so. But I really have to warn you about this. This total mind control and total polluting foods and waters and everything. These times are over and they are changing. I know I got this 1 minute call, but I'll have to advise the people. There has been keep in mind, the best medicine is the nature. Keep in mind that our sun is a powerful piece of nature too. Reconnect with the sunlight and be aware of the big massive campaigns that has been made to turn us away from the sun, because the sun will activate you. And it will give you intuition, it will strengthen your bone structures, it is a very helpful tool. And you will gain much wisdom if you just go and greet the sun and say, hey, Beitvash, or whatever you say in your language. And also know that Gaia, Pachamama herself, has very, very much medicine. So reconnect with the nature, and both the sun and Gaia, Pachamama, and Niana are very intelligent beings. And so we have to decolonize ourselves from thinking about them just as objects to be, and for Gaia's sake, I mean, to be used and to be raped and controlled, as the people of Gaia are being controlled, mind controlled and raped. We must put an end to this. My 30 minutes went very quick, but time is also speeding very much up. So right now, in the 24 hours, it's just 16 hours that's in the business. And this will go quicker and quicker. It will shorten up. It has to do with that the Earth's magnetic pole is slowing down, and it's going to stop to 0.0, and then it's going to start the cycle again. So we are living in a very exciting time, and I have total faith in humanity and that we will survive. We shall survive. And absolutely the indigenous peoples of all over the world. Thank you very much for me.
Både baby båkaide. First, I want to say thank you to Office of Contemporary Art, Katja and Antonio, and the crew for letting me have this presentation and for including me in this interesting project in highlighting Sami art. My presentation is called Contextualizing the Art of Ivar Joks from a Dodje perspective. When Ivar Joks first saw the light of day on a mountain near the village of Karasjok in northern Norway in 1932, the Sami did not have a word for art. Life, art, and craft were all the same, and the word Dodje covered all creative activities. Dodje, as Katja also explained, is often translated as Sami handicraft in order to fit into a Western understanding. But the term embraces more profound layers of meaning. Dodje reflects a holistic view of life and culture. The concept encompasses multiple practical, social, and spiritual activities, from the gathering of materials to processes involving Sami epistemologies and belief systems. Dodje encompasses both the production of an item and the item itself. During his art education in Oslo, Ivar Joks was confronted with the official Norwegian art system. He learned that the noble high art should be separated from ordinary folk art. Meanwhile, back home in his own Sami community, Dodje was becoming more institutionalized and locked into narrower confines. But Joks had a stroke of luck when he met his Danish wife Inger Nielsen. They embarked upon an artistic alliance that would last for the rest of their lives. In the mid-1950s, they went to Copenhagen, where Inger introduced Ivar to the independent experimental avant-garde art scene. That experience liberated his mind and enabled him to exceed any constraints of genres. The enthusiasm for non-Western art that Ivar Joks experienced in his youth in Denmark gave him tools to lift his own cultural heritage into the contemporary art scene. It did this in such an early stage that few understood what his works were really all about. Art historians have often underestimated his works. Their framework of understanding has primarily confined to concepts about art historical modernism that have viewed the Sami elements as an insignificant addition to pictorial art. Several previous surveys about Sami art have focused on the distinction between traditional knowledge, handicraft, and Dodje on the one hand, and pictorial art, autonomy, and artistic freedom on the other. A wild and holistic interpretation of Dodje, like we find in Ivar Joks' works, reflects constraints of genres. With Joks' engagement and deep understanding of his own culture, he takes back the ancient understanding of the term Dodje, which has not been twisted and westernized, where creativity is intertwined with a deep and profound respect for nature and the circular notion of time. Ivar Joks always stressed the importance of Dodje not being exclusively associated with memories, keepsakes, and the past, and was concerned about giving his art relevant content as contemporary art. He believed that, quote, "If the Sami rigidly hang on to the old ways, we would end up as museum folks with a museum culture that lives in exhibition and has no legitimacy in life," quote end. In other words, he cautioned against limiting the ways in which Dodje could be practiced or attempts to freeze Sami culture. Through his practice, which was so closely associated with broad holistic understanding of Dodje, he gave a voice to Sami methods, traditions, practice, and experiences in an arena that had previously rejected Sami art as ethnology rather than art. The vandrende seide, or wandering holy stone in English, is a small sculpture now situated at the University of Tromsø. Seides are natural formations the Sami regards as being holy. People made sacrifices to the Seides in order to communicate with and worship their old gods, and some have kept this tradition. At these sacrificial sites, people should be quiet and not behave in a boisterous manner. Ivar Joks called the Seides, quote, divine stones which could allow access to the soul of nature, quote end. The first time I saw this stone was when I visited Ivar Joks in the 1990s at his home in Tromsø. He had placed it on a table outside his front door of his apartment in the middle of Tromsø city. He then told me that he believed it to be a genuine seide. It has been formed by thousands of years in nature and reveals no sharp edges. This circular shape has almost an hypnotic effect, like it is spinning. Today, the vandrende seide is a part of a massive presentation of Joks's works at the University of Tromsø. As you can see here, it is exhibited in a plexiglass cage, and it's in a big hall where hundreds of students and teachers passes every day. According to a traditional Sami perspective, it is totally decontextualized. But its shape also connects to modernist abstract art, which is reinforced by the present context. An older picture of the same seide stone reveals it in a third setting. It is placed on the wooden trencher embraced by a reindeer horn and 3 pieces of blackwood. This display is probably from the 1980s and is curiously called Den vandrende seide kommer hjem. The wandering seide is returning home. Here there is nothing alien to Sami culture surrounding the stone, like the clean-cut exposure at the university in 2018. A significant feature of Ivar Joks' artistic practice was to continuously change and rebuild his works. He often incorporated new elements into his sculptures or removed others in the fullness of time. Joks encouraged disintegration, and when something collapsed in his installations, he simply used the objects in other works. Another example of this practice is the sculpture Jaska ditt jorda jorda, Stille vender tanken, silently the thought turns, that took at least 4 years to complete. Joks obtained some old logs from a house that he kept outside for a couple of years to allow the forces of nature to leave their marks on the wood. After this, he could work with the wood without any sharp tools. 2 vertical timber logs are positioned parallel to each other and attached with a wooden bolt. Between the logs, several reindeer horns are woven together and tied to each other with braided leather straps. The original sculpture remained like this for some years until the artist discovered new materials. Some old and decayed wood from the gunwale of an old boat awoke his engagement. He produced long, sharp, spear-like wooden pieces by splitting it with wooden wedges, which he then inserted between the reindeer horns, and thereby changed the appearance of the original sculpture. And here is from an exhibition on Tromsø Museum in 1999. Excuse me, I need some water. Joks was totally against any use of preservatives and highly engaged in what the natural processes in the materials do. The sculpture was purchased to the University of Tromsø in the late 1990s and is now at the Sami house Arna at campus there. Someday the work is bound to change. After a while, the leather straps holding the horns in place between the logs will dry out and start to decompose. The reindeer horns will no longer be attached to anything. They will probably fall out again and change the sculpture, and this time completely. This could easily become a challenge for the owners. For how long can it be considered an artwork before it has to be removed? How much disintegration will the university tolerate? A third example of how Joks emphasized the importance of process is found outdoors in his home village Karasjok. The 7.5 meter tall Runebomhammer, or holy drum hammer, ballin in Sami language. It was built and finished in 1983 in the forest close to the Sami High School in Karasjok. Iver Joks was dependent of good colleagues to assist him in building the sculpture. Among them was the dojar, artist working with Doji, Jon Ole Andersen from Horma in Dietno, Tana. Also presented in this Let the River Flow exhibition with a guksi, a Sami cup there. Andersen has actually built most of Joks' larger public works. He's highly skilled in locating and collecting the best materials to use for such works, and has spent a lot of time together with Joks detecting the perfect items for the preeminent results. Here you see clear-cut shapes that dominates the composition. 4 solid pinewood timber logs hold 2 open cylinder-like forms extending horizontally in opposite direction. And pine is the most common tree in this particular forest, and thus the sculpture reflects and cooperates with its environment, even though it has been debarked. Joks touches upon several significant complexes with the work, including religion, erosion, and Sami aesthetics. With the monumental scale and the commissioner's request, it is expected that the sculpture would be situated in the schoolyard or in front of the entrance as a public work in connection to the building. However, Joks did not follow a traditional Western format for a monumental public work, but very consciously decided to place the sculpture in the forest. When the sculpture was new, it stood out like an enormous pine-colored fist in the landscape. The struggle for Sami rights, with hunger strikes and demonstrations against the damming of the Alta Kautokeino River, was, as we know, highly debated in Norway at this time. And this piece could easily be read as a political statement. But slowly, nature changed its surroundings, and thereby also the impression of the work. After more than 30 years, the surrounding pines have grown bigger, and branches of willow and birch trees almost encroach upon the sculpture. The trees have grown so close that they almost incorporate the sculpture as an actual part of nature itself. The pine color has turned gray, and the sculpture is almost impossible to see until you're very close to it. From a distance of a few meters, the lower part of the sculpture is hidden by moss and heath, giving an impression of the work as growing from the ground. I should probably show you this picture. This effect strengthened the impression of something organic, which in ecological terms belonged to the place. Rune Bommehammeren did not seem so politically charged anymore, but suggested instead something mystical and sacred, and standing in front of the sculpture, its shape and format easily evoke a sense of awe in the beholder. Ivar Joks had anticipated changes in the cycle of his work and determined that in the long run the sculpture would one day vanish and become nourishment for new trees. This challenging and experimental way of incorporating art and nature with this integration makes the work quite unique and connects it to an avant-garde thinking that is still uncommon in public works in Norway. It is probably most useful to search for an origin of this idea in its location as a key connection to the ancient Sami aesthetic, linked to ecological thinking and a circular notion of time. But in 2015, the Rune Bommehammeren was removed to make room for an expansion of the school. The owners of the school building, Statsbygg, the Directorate of Public Construction and Property Management, along with the board of the Sami High School, decided to place the sculpture in front of the school building. According to the planners, the sculpture could not be placed anywhere else in the vast forest still surrounding the school. Arguments for the removal were not only that the expansion of the school was necessary, but also that the sculpture would be more safe and viable in a different location. This is 8 years after the artist had passed away. And this decision displays a total misunderstanding and neglect of the artist's intention with the work. The enigmatic, culturally related philosophy behind the hammer was eradicated and replaced by this square building. The Rune Bommehammeren was as connected to his side as the Seidit at the old sacred places. If they are removed, they will no longer communicate, having lost their power. Even though the Rune Bommehammeren clearly is not an ethnographic object in a museum, it does not belong to a classic European tradition either. The whole concept around the sculpture is dependent on context and display strategy. I have been working for many years with Ivar Joks' relation with Dodji. I must admit that for me it's difficult not to see how deeply this inflicted him and his works. Still, there have been some critical feedbacks concerning these aspects, as Katja also told us about, also now in Oslo. The critics state that the context in this exhibition reduces Joks' works into Sami craft or Dodji, and that the holistic aspects of Dodji is stereotypical and reduces the presentation of art, making it less modern. In other words, an understanding of Dodji as something remote from art that should not be an issue when addressing Joks' art, because they want him to be a true modernist. But this is not the first time the Sami aspects of his art have been perceived as disturbing. The Ivar Joks retrospective exhibition in 1999 by Riksutstillinger proclaimed that they wanted to remove everything that could disturb the presentation of pure art, and thereby most of the Sami connotations. And 10 years after that, this reoccurred in a big exhibition in Tromsø that focused only on the modernist aspects of Ivar Joks' works and actively avoided his connection to his Sami background. After this, and also several times before actually, it has happened a lot in the Sami art world, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that the focus has turned and indigenous methods have become ever more important. I can mention the Sami art project at the University of Tromsø, the Sakahan in Ottawa at the National Gallery of Canada, Documenta 14 in Kassel and Athens, and the Dhaka Art Summit in Bangladesh, plus. But now, after all these efforts, science projects, publications, great exhibitions, and genuine interest from important institutions abroad, the old polemic discussion, where modernism rejects tradition, is all of a sudden brought to light. It is like a flash from the past to see how the word tradition is almost proudly misunderstood and taken for something static from the past, while it's actually the opposite that is happening. It is exactly this way of framing Sami art expressions that is static and unfortunately still belongs to a strong tradition in Norway. Modernism, with all its limits and restraints that divides different expressions into strict categories set up several decades ago, belongs to the past. It is simply not the right tool you need to understand what is happening today and where the art of Eva Jox is still participating. The concept of art has been challenged ages ago by non-Western expressions and is ever evolving. And this is the Guksi of Jon Ole Andersen. The Doji is a dynamic concept that relates to all aspects of Sami aesthetics and thinking. Just because it is an Asian concept, it escapes segregation, unlike the rather new concept of Daida, which suddenly seems trapped like a ghost from modernism. And yes, the Guksi, the Sami cup, is a genius object. It contains wisdom, balance, tension, beauty, and function. It might look a bit lost behind bars in an exhibition, just like the Vandrende Seidi. Of course, it is out of context, but at the same time it serves as a homage and a reminder to the other object in this exhibition. It comes from the same universe. The professor Harald Gaske says in Nordlys the 22nd of May 2018, quote, "Aesthetics is not reduced to an art scientific teaching about form in indigenous studies. It represents values like belonging and ethical responsibility, and it stands for a holistic approach to the connection between the good life and the way we actually live our lives. Like this, it grasps main issues in the debates of society about humans' responsibility and what position the individual has concerning environment, climate, and our continued existence on Earth." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irene. That was very clear, I think. I think the message has come through. It is my great pleasure now to invite to speak Megan Tamati-Quennell, who is coming all the way from Aotearoa, New Zealand. But actually, I'm being told that we have some coffee. So perhaps we'll have some coffee before going on to Megan's speech. So I invite you all to have some coffee and a glass of water, and then I'll do my proper introductions for Megan. Thank you.
Sound is still on. I would also like to thank Katja and Antonio and all the wonderful people for this beautiful event and for the invitations and this very exciting and thrilling program. Thank you, my goddess.
Thank you. Ko Ranginui kei runga, ko Papatua Nuku kei raro, ko ngā tangata kei Wanganui, ti hei Mauri ora. Kei te mihi a hau i te mātua nui i te rangi, nana nei nā mea katoa. I ngā karangaranga maha i te whānau whānui, i te iwi whānui, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko tiatiawa rawa ko ngaitahu oku iwi, ko raniere irihana, rawa ko hana nikuru wala oku tūpuna, no te wahi paunamu toku ukai pō, ko Megan Tāmati Nau taku ingoa. The greeting I gave is a brief mihi in my own language to acknowledge those who have gone before, to introduce myself and to identify my place in the world. It's also to thank Katja and Antonio and the staff at the OCA for inviting me to be here. Translated, it says, to the Sky Father above, the Earth Mother below, to the people who exist in between, there is life. Greetings to the Creator of all things, calls of welcome to all humanity, to all people. Greetings to everybody here. I am of the Tiatiawa and Ngaitahu people of New Zealand, a grandchild of Raniere Irihana and Hana Nikuru Wela, born of the place of Greenstone, the south of the land of the South Island of New Zealand. My name is Megan Tāmati Nau. So my focus today, my talk today focuses on contemporary Māori art and politics, and through the work of 4 contemporary artists, Māori artists, Ralph Hortedy, Shona Rapira Davies, Emily Karaka and Kora Tuaru Rewari. Each of them as art makers have used their work to draw attention to bear witness to, and to make trouble. Through their work, they have taken on racism, sexism, colonialism, inequality, war, environmental issues, and more. They were also aligned, the women particularly, with the Māori protest movements of the late 1970s and 1980s, adding their voices as artists at that time to the growing Māori discontent at their loss of land, lack of power, marginal status and alienation, born of colonisation and the assimilation policies of the 1950s and 1960s in New Zealand. So the first artist we have up here is Ralph Hortedy. Ralph Hortedy is a senior Māori artist, a Māori modernist, and a pioneer of the contemporary Māori art movement. He began working as an artist in the 1950s and continued his career conquering the art mainstream and becoming one of New Zealand's most important artists. A formalist, he was a meticulous maker of objects, was well versed in the traditions and histories of fine art, but he was also a humanist, devoted to many human rights causes nationally and internationally. He was profoundly anti-war, making work that protested war from the beginning of his career, and was anti-apartheid. He made works that protested against environmental damage and had a long and complex relationship with radical politics. So I'm just going to move on to another image. A signature of Hortedy's practice is the colour black. He belonged... Sorry? Oh, it's not come up?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, obviously you can't see it very well. I can go back to the one. So he belongs to a family of black colour painters, Goya, Matisse, Robert Motherwell, Malevich, Ed Reinhardt and others, with some of his most important paintings being his black paintings that he began creating in the mid-1960s and continued throughout his career. Artist Ed Reinhardt's pared-back aesthetic is said to have inspired Hortedy's black paintings, but unlike Reinhardt, who attempted to empty his works of meaning, Hortedy's black paintings can be read as full. Like the Māori creation concept of te kore, the nothingness from which everything emerged, Hortedy's work can be read as imbued with possibilities and potential. His French Māori Catholic upbringing is also said to inform his black paintings. And Māori art historian, I'll move on to another image, art historian Te Rangihiro Pānoho asserts that Hōteri's black paintings reflect his Te Ao Pauri iwi tribal heritage. Pānoho cites a historical relationship with the colour black through a founding Te Ao Pauri iwi narrative. The narrative recalls when Te Ao Pauri, then known as Ngāti Ruanui, came under attack from a neighbouring iwi Ngāpuhi, that Ngāti Ruanui burned everything of value and escaped under smoke and fire, and reinvented and renamed themselves Te Ao Pauri, which translates as dark smoke, after that act. A truly international artist in intellect and style, Hōteri was the first Māori artist to be accepted by the art mainstream in New Zealand in 1961, and for a long time was the only Māori artist acknowledged and supported by the New Zealand art world. He was our first Māori international, gaining a scholarship to travel in the same year, 1961, to study at the Central School of Art in London, and from there travel to Italy and France. The late Māori art historian Jonathan Mani Fioke described Hōteri this way: Hōteri belongs to the forefront of the New Zealand art mainstream art history, but in a sense he also stands outside of it, both as a Māori and as one of the most cosmopolitan, sophisticated international artists New Zealand has yet produced. So I wanted to start with some of Hōteri's early protest works. His Polaris series, created in 1962, made reference to the development of the US Polaris nuclear warheads deployed on submarines in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis. His Algiers and Human Rights series were also painted in 1962, where he responded to French colonialism and the war for independence in Algeria. And his important Sangro paintings, which this is one of, that can be regarded as his first major series of paintings, were painted in Vence in the south of France in 1962 and in London in 1964. Hōteri's Sangro paintings protested the futility and stupidity of war and lamented the wasteful destruction of the lives of young men. On each painting he stenciled or handwrote numbers, 21, 22, 23, 24, the ages of the young Māori men buried at the Sangro River War Cemetery on the Italian Adriatic coast that the series is named after and that he visited. The cemetery name, I'll just put the next one, is repetitively stenciled on some of the works too, in the form of a ritual funerary rhythm. The style of stenciling is significant too, in that it was lettering familiar to many young Māori. Stenciled lettering that was used on farms, wool sheds and in freezing works. Hōteri's dark message with these works was that Māori youth were being exported like carcasses to a war that wasn't their own. His Sangro paintings were also a moving personal statements that expressed his own grief and commemorated the loss of his brother Jack, who was killed in action in 1943 at the age of 22 and is buried in that cemetery. The next works I'm going to talk about, I'll just show you another work of Ralph's, are his Te Whiti series works, made in 1972. They were described as being similar to illuminated manuscripts of the medieval period, as Hōteri not only used text on his paintings, he referenced the sources of the text he used within them too. His Te Whiti works are related to the Māori prophetic movements that emerged in the 1830s, but were most active in the 1860s through to the 1890s. They were connected specifically to Parihaka, a large autonomous Māori village founded in 1867 by two Māori prophets, Te Whiti o Rongomai and Tohu Kākahi, during the punitive years of mass land confiscation and Māori dispossession in New Zealand. Parihaka is one of my home communities that I whakapapa to, or that I connect to, through my fourth great-grandfather, Raniere Erihana, who I acknowledged in my mihi at the beginning of this talk. It's also the name of my son. It is a village in Taranaki in the central part of the North Island of New Zealand, a community that was established in response to the threat of war. the Land Wars, referred to officially in New Zealand as the New Zealand Wars, a series of armed conflicts between British and colonial forces and the Māori people that began in 1845 and continued through to 1872. Pariaka was established using a philosophy of peace and a Christian Māori religious doctrine in part drawn from the biblical Old Testament that formed a faith called the Paimariri faith. Pariaka was one of the prophetic movements. There was quite a few of them. They started there and moved through the country. It was a highly spiritual as well as a highly political movement that emerged in the 1860s as a response to the invasion, colonisation and acculturation Māori were experiencing. By 1878, Pariaka became one of the largest Māori settlements in New Zealand. It became a haven and refuge for thousands of Māori driven out and made homeless by European colonisation, and was one of the first pan-tribal Māori movements. Recognising the destructive effects of war, the two rangatira, Māori leaders, Te Whiti and Tohu, declared they would use spiritual powers rather than weapons to claim their right to live on land they had occupied for centuries. They drew on ancestral as well as Christian teachings, offering spiritual and political leadership to their followers, and practiced a form of peaceful protest, non-violent resistance, decades before Gandhi's equivalent response to British imperialism and Martin Luther King's use of civil disobedience for the advancement of civil rights in the United States. Hortony's Te Whiti series were inspired by excuse me, Te Whiti and Tohu's creative response to the invasion of Pariaka by military force and their eloquent protest against the alienation of their land. On the 5th of November 1881, 1,600 militia and armed police invaded Pariaka, but instead of violence, the soldiers were greeted by hundreds of skipping and singing children who offered them food. The invasion was driven by the greed for Māori land. Parliament passed legislation enabling the government to arrest and hold people at Pariaka indefinitely without trial. Hundreds of men and youth from Pariaka were exiled to the South Island prisons. Actually, they ended up keeping some of them in caves in the South Island, where they were kept without trial for 19 years. And there was a military occupation of Pariaka for 5 years. Then it was described to me, growing up, like they continually burned the crops, continually burnt the women, raped the women, and just stayed there and created havoc. So I grew up with those stories. Pariaka has been described as one of the worst human rights breaches in New Zealand's history. Horty's Te Whiti works are mostly small in scale and dark in colour. They are meditative pieces that assert the fundamental importance of land to a Māori way of being. They also give voice to the Māori land rights movement that in the 1970s was beginning to gain momentum. So these are just images from that series. They are paintings to be read, listened to, and to be understood. Hortiri goes as far, this is a quote, goes as far as to detail at the foot of each work book references and page numbers for his written sources. The Te Whiti series then is a small library of open books. The 19th century sources also form part of an internationalist plea against the gathering storm of militarism, industrialism and colonialism. In the 1980s, Hortiri protested South African apartheid, and in 1981, the Springbok rugby tour that divided New Zealand. Hortiri, like many others, was anti-tour and was unable to separate the race-based apartheid system in South Africa from the sport that was the national game for both countries. An important work, and I've put it in the wrong order, there it is back there, for Hortiri from the period was a reversed image of the New Zealand flag, the Union Jack, which asked the rhetorical question, is this a black Union Jack? A black Union Jack. Other works protesting South African apartheid included Tears for Biko in remembrance of black political activist Steve Biko, who was murdered in prison in South Africa, and All Africa that incorporated a poem by a leading Māori poet, Honi Tūwhare. Other 1980s works protested French nuclear testing in the Pacific, which we've had a bit of. Is that the right image up there? Yeah. His Black Rainbow series, which is this one, he made a whole lot of them. Were made to mark each nuclear test carried out. So every time there was a nuclear test, Hortedy would make a work in response and to kind of protest it. Further works lamented the bombing of the Mururoa Atoll in the Pacific and the French bombing of the Rainbow Warrior in Auckland Harbour, the Greenpeace boat used to peacefully protest French nuclear testing. Now I'm just going to move on a little faster. Hortedy's Aramwana works were also of the period and were made in resistance to the building of an aluminium smelter on the ecologically fragile salt marshes of Aramwana near where he lived in Dunedin. A final work to show of Hortedy's is Song. Song is a lithograph, but was also realised as a painting titled Song of Solomon. His song works were created around the time of the Gulf War and can be seen as an indictment of the conflict and a hymn to the redemptive power of language. Song juxtaposes the language of conflict gathered by poet Cilla McQueen, who was actually his wife. He had a couple of wives, from the news media, military language and lyrical lines from the Song of Solomon that Hortedy drew from the Bible. So I'm going to move on to another artist now. Shona Rapira Davies is a senior Māori artist, woman artist of Ngāti Wai and Ngāti Hine descent. She's a sculptor who also has a painting and drawing practice. Her works are often introspective, but also are highly charged, which speak to the social impact of colonisation. Agonisingly candid, Rapira Davies' work is part autobiographical and provides insight into an intensely personal and private world. Her works express vulnerability and trauma and the racism that Māori women particularly experience. Two key works in her practice are her tangi drawings, which this is one of them, and Ngā Morihu, which in English translates as The Survivors. Ngā Morihu is an incredible sculptural installation made up of life-size ceramic women, a whāriki, a woven mat, uncompleted, and a ceramic child which faces the woman. Made before she created Ngā Morihu, but strongly connected to it. Her tangi drawings work with trace and line and are visually understated. A series of 10 drawings, tangi are made up of smudged and muted graphic images, irregular and off-centre words, and faint coloured pencil marks on paper. So this is a couple more of those. To read them is distressing, moving, almost voyeuristic, like reading the pages of someone's diary. They are intimate passages that combine to create an acute lament. They are personal and profound drawings that articulate deep grief about the loss of a brother, the breakdown of the social structure of Māori families, the loss of connection to land and place, and the expression of whakamā, a painful and paralysing sense of shame particular to Māori people. This is a quote from Shona. Tangi are probably my most personal and most vulnerable of all works that I have done. A lot of time I like to put myself at a distance from my work, but those ones were right there. On top of being taken away was the whole shame of it, the shame of your mother killing herself, the shame of your Māori heritage. I had actually put it there, all there, and when I looked at them, I thought, I can't show these. I don't want these to be seen. I want this hidden. I wanted to bury them because I thought they were too close to me and could be connected to me very, very quickly. With bitter honesty, Rapira Davies' tangi drawings express attitudes and the rhetoric of white middle New Zealand of the 1950s and 1960s. They record the assimilationist practices enacted in a period and the impact of those practices on Māori people and culture. Like Ngā Morihu, which celebrates the majesty and resilience of Māori women, Rapira Davies' tangi drawings transcend the individual and the singular and instead eloquently express the experience of Māori women. She said, I remember when I was doing tangi, when I was going through drawing them, it was a very slow process over a period of a couple of weeks. I do like to construct and have a real hold on what I am doing. They didn't just come out. I am not at all an expressionist. So when I look at them now, I can see past the paper to the time. This is the next work, Ngā Morihu. So Ngā Morihu was made over 30 years ago when the artist was 35. It's a powerful installation that depicts the karanga, a call of welcome undertaken on ceremonial occasions by senior women steeped in mātauranga Māori knowledge and cultural practice. Some of the figures of Ngā Morihu are inscribed with text. The kai karanga, the woman delivering the karanga, which is the one at the very front, is adorned with a waiata, a song which tells of the connections between two tribes, Ngāti Hine, the artist's own, and Te Arawa, expressing the interweaving of genealogy and history embodied in the karanga. So when you do a karanga, you're kind of calling to the people that are there. You're talking about who you are and what you're doing in that moment. It might be to do with it might be a funeral, it might be another kind of event, but you're kind of speaking about, but you link yourself to the people that you are coming to visit or see. The child's body is positioned facing the women and is covered with words of a poem by northern writer Christina Linden. Other figures wear racist insults like scars, the text emblematic of wounds created by racism and the pain concealed and carried by Māori women. I'll just go here. Rapira Davies presents Ngā Morihu at the same level as the viewer to allow people like Augustus Rodin's 1888 sculpture, The Burghers of Calais, that she cites as a reference for her work to mingle with their ancestors. The seated kuia, which are these ones here, female elders anchor the installation. In Ngā Morihu, Rapira Davies reveals the karanga. I've never seen anybody else create a work based on karanga, not anyone. There's no traditional works that depict it. It's an action, it's something that happens, but it's really portrayed. So it's a ritual state that people get in to deliver the karanga. So she pays tribute to Māori women, and through it she conveys a Māori definition of beauty, strength and worth. So I'll just flick up to Emily. So Emily Karaka, like shown at Rapira Davies, this is a new artist, is a senior Māori woman artist. Now these women are both in their 60s now, but they really broke ground. She is of Ngāti Hine, Ngāti Wai, Ngāti Tai, Ngaitai and Waihau Māori descent, and defines herself as an abstract expressionist painter. Her work is recognisable for its expressive intensity, her use, usually not this work obviously, of high-key colour, text and her gritty address of political issues related to Māori land rights, to equity, to tino rangatiratanga or Māori sovereignty and the Treaty of Waitangi. Karaka's work is an exploration of Māori marginalisation and dispossession. It's fiercely passionate and unflinchingly political. It was described by Māori writer Witi Ihe Maira as an outpouring of raw emotions, guts, intellect and passion, and as a work that will always be seen as political. This is Emily, a quote from Emily. My work has been centred around the Treaty of Waitangi as the founding document, as the base of our legislation and government in this country. It's to do with rangatiratanga, sovereignty, our atua, our gods, our taonga, our treasures, land rights, living rights, arts and cultural rights guaranteed in that foundational document. Karaka's important painting, The Treaties, which is this one here, was created in 1984 and refers to three key documents in New Zealand's history: the Treaty of Waitangi, ANZUS, the 1952 Defence Pact between New Zealand and Australia and the United States, and the Gleneagles Agreement, the Commonwealth's 1977 agreement against sporting contacts with the apartheid-era South Africa. The concept of sacrifice is depicted in the triptych, with each panel featuring a stylised crucifixion with an abstract figure below each, sheets of paper, the three accords torn and bloodied. In addition to the names of each of the documents painted across the top of the three panels, there's a text in the form of Ngāti Maniapoto tribal leader Rewi Maniapoto's famous cry of defiance, ko whai whai tono mātou, ake ake ake, we will fight on against you forever and ever and forever. that he declared when resisting the British attacks at the Battle of Warako in 1864. In the 1970s, Maniapoto's statement was adopted as a catch cry for Māori protest. Karaka herself was an active member of Ngā Tamatoa, the Young Māori Warriors, was involved in the Not One More Acre land rights movement, and was part of the 1975 Māori Land March when thousands of Māori people descended on Parliament in Wellington to voice their grievances. She also participated in the occupation of land at Bastion Point in Auckland in 1977. So this is a work based on Bastion Point. Two further works by Karaka, Rangitoto Eruption, and then this one, Maunga Waiwai. I'll just go back to that one. Use ancestral names and the Māori notion of the right to land through occupation. Rangitoto Eruption highlights the ongoing struggle of the Ngāti Whātua iwi for land rights at Bastion Point in Auckland. Their ancestral names related to Bastion Point, Takaparawa, Orake, Rangitoto, Tamaki, Makaurau, highlight Māori connection to those environments pre-colonisation. A female ancestor performing a defiant haka or war dance, and other female kaitiaki or female guardians rise from the land in her canvas, reinforcing Ngāti Whātua's claim to those lands as mana whenua. I'm just going to move on. This is Emily too. The issues that I'm always discussing are economic, she said, social and environmental, and land rights that tie back to the basis of justice in our country, the covenant of our country, the korowai or cloak of the country. So the final artist I'm going to speak about is Kura Tuwaru Rewari. Kura Tuwaru Rewari is a painter of Ngāpuhi descent who, like the other Māori women artists I've included in this presentation, rose to prominence in the mid-1980s. Her work, like theirs, gave voice and visibility to Māori women and gave credence to their concerns within New Zealand's art mainstream. All three women, Shona, Emily and Kura, were part of a generation who by the 1970s had become disillusioned with white monocultural nationalism and were described by the late Māori academic Dr. Ranginui Walker as the first urban-born Māori intelligentsia, an articulate and eloquent anti-colonial voice which emerged to argue for a shift in nationalism to biculturalism. So biculturalism was a postmodern construct particular to New Zealand that recognised the Treaty of Waitangi signed in 1840 as the founding document of New Zealand and gave effect to the partnership relationship between Māori and the Crown as defined by the treaty. The space that Tuwaru Rewari, Karaka and Rapira Davies occupy really was that of mana wahine Māori. Mana wahine Māori is described as the expression and authority and power of Māori women specifically, and their right to name and represent Māori women's concerns. It was also part of the broader political discourse of the Māori protest movement and has been defined as a tool of analysis and as an ingredient in the larger decolonising agenda conveyed by Māori women leaders such as the late Eva Rickard and Donna Awatiri. More than simply a Māori version of feminism in which the maintenance of male power over women was seen as unacceptable. Sorry. Mana wahine Māori, sorry, like Māori women's identity was bound up culturally and spiritually with the land and included whakapapa or Māori genealogical ties to land and place. Different from feminism, it also drew strongly on the acts and actions of our female ancestors as foundations for Māori women's well-being and cited tino rangatiratanga Māori sovereignty and a recognition of the treaty as key ideals of that movement. I might skip that. I can't. Kura Tuwaru Rewari began her art career in the 1970s. She attended Elam's School of Fine Arts. Am I over? Nearly done. She graduated in 1973 with a Diploma of Fine Arts. Core themes within her practice include land and spirituality. Like Karaka, she also focused a body of work on the Treaty of Waitangi and its meaning for Māori people. Another aspect of her work is her focus on the connection of the treaty to the Rātana Māori faith. Again, that's a Māori prophetic movement, one of the last ones to occur, and a Māori religion which was established in the 1920s by Wiremu Tahu Pōtaki Rātana. Tuari Rewiri's great-grandfather, Hapete Renata, was a principal figure in the Rātana movement in the far north of the North Island and assisted Rātana with the development of his religious philosophy. The two, regarded as sacred covenants, the Bible and the Treaty of Waitangi form the basis of the movement's religious canon. The two texts are said to be emblematic of the spiritual and material doctrines of the Church. There was supposed to have been a fourth article, this is Kura speaking, to the Treaty of Waitangi to protect our belief systems, Ngā Atua Māori, the Māori deities. Contemporary Rātana followers like myself are concerned by the apparent loss of traditional Māori knowledge. So I'll just end, with two final quotes from Kura that sum up her work and speak about her practice. She said, "I am a Māori artist. I use my Māoriness as a base for my work, which are strongly motivated by politics. Me and my ancestors, me and my land, me and my family. Me as a Māori woman, me as tangata whenua of Aotearoa. As a Māori artist, I try to embrace the tapu, sacred nature of being Māori, the tapu, sacred nature of our tikanga, protocols, ways of doing things, of our wairua, our spirituality, and of our whole being in order to reconstruct and redefine what it is that we had." Thank you, sorry.
Thank you very much, Megan. That was a tough ending, but I think, I think now we have some time to take a break and have some lunch. So I invite you to get some food, which is this way. This way? In the cantina, out of the building, out through the front door, around the building and in the cantina. It is my greatest pleasure to introduce you to Anya Mangawang. She is an Irish-Filipino postdoctorate scholar and researcher at the musicology department at Oslo University. So I'd like to ask you to give a very warm round of applause to Anya, please.
Thank you very, very much, Katja, Antonio, the Sami Advisory Council, Harald and Gunvar, and Nikhil, Liv, everybody here at Oka. Thank you very, very much for this invitation to present some of my work with you here today. It's a great privilege from a popular musicologist perspective to be invited into an art gallery space. Before I begin my talk, I just would like to, in the interest of accessibility and respect, issue a content warning. There are two images in this presentation, one that depicts death and one that depicts abuse. I will give a little notice before they will be shown for any discretion you may need to take. I also issue a very brief apology at the start because due to time constraints, I cannot play for you full musical excerpts as I would really, really like to. But I encourage you to look out for these musical examples yourself and follow them up in your own time. So, let me begin. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Through popular protest song's ground zero, according to Dorian Lynskey, took place in New York in March 1939. On West 4th Street in Cafe Society, Billie Holiday sang this song, Strange Fruit. And to many music scholars and cultural historians, this moment marks the birth of the popular protest song. A Jewish school teacher and communist by the name of Abel Meeropol was stirred to write this song after he saw a photograph of a lynching that took place in Marion, Indiana, in the summer of 1930. And I will show this photograph in question now. On August 6, 1930, Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith were lynched for an alleged armed robbery and rape of a white woman. The two men were dragged from their prison cells by a mob made up of up to 5,000 people, including women and children, and then lynched. Local photographer Lawrence Beitler took what would become the most iconic photograph of lynching in America. Although it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination the first protest song, it was arguably the first that worked as art and not propaganda. Peter Manuel's influential 2017 essay, World Music and Activism Since the End of History, argues that the protest musics that blossomed worldwide in the 1960s and 70s were the product of a global cultural climate, spawned by movements that shared modernist ideals of secular, liberal, egalitarian justice and universal human rights, deriving from the legacy of Enlightenment. He provides many rich and insightful examples from around the world to support this view, starting from Francis Fukuyama's conjecture that the triumph of capitalism and democracy over socialism signaled the so-called end of history. And he notes that this change in the global political order has depoliticized popular music. For Peter Manuel, he sees the current cultural landscape to be more fractious, with progressive movements being cause-specific rather than transcendent or visionary. And meanwhile, right-wing or militant movements gain ground. For Manuel, he suggests that wider political trends have deprived countercultural music of much of its sense of urgency. And to this, there are two claims made. First is about the decline in protest music, and second is about its cause. From some perspectives, it certainly can look and feel, for those of us familiar with the pop sounds of 60s protest songs, that protest music might be in decline. Indeed, it's a familiar trope of the media in general, in which hundreds or even thousands of journalists seem to beg the question, where have all the protest songs gone? But it can be hard to sustain this impression empirically. Where is the hard data to chart such a decline? Much depends, of course, on how we define protest. And even if we could agree on such a definition, we are still left with the task of measuring the rise and decline of such songs. Do the charts, for example, give any kind of adequate guide to their presence within the public sphere? When we say that a song was popular, do we simply mean that it was sold in large numbers? I suspect not. But if not, then how do we determine a relevant measurement? Instead today, I'm just going to offer you my perspective as a music researcher responding to globalizing musical practices. And as many researchers, music researchers, we responded by shifting our analytical and ethnographic attention from music within nation states to music across borders, both within the region and beyond, to the global arena. So in the brief time that I have left today, I offer a glimpse of the directions protest songs have moved in recent years. From the beginnings of Holiday's Strange Fruit, that for many served as the sparks that led to the US civil rights movement, I'll touch on a range of popular songs of protest that address eco-Indigenous issues, decolonization, and anti-war sentiments. But let us begin a little closer to home. As Mari so eloquently described earlier today, sound and music, the drum and the yoik, have particular significance in Sami culture. And as my fellow presenter and renowned yoiker Sarah Marielle Gaup will later elaborate in more detail. For this example, I've chosen Swedish Sami Joiker, Sofia Janok, as just one of the musicians promoting ecological concerns in her performances. And in her performances, she combined jazz and popular music with joik. She tours the world as a musician, performing across the Nordic countries, as well as China and India. Her pop songs serve as a form of environmental protest, raising issues surrounding cultural survival for Indigenous artists and their communities. Singing mostly in Northern Sami, Janok also sings and writes lyrics in Swedish and English as well, to help better promote her message on a global stage. I'm going to play just a brief extract from one of her songs from 2016, This Is My Land. And in this brief excerpt of the video that you will hear and see, it begins with an intro text, which is an excerpt from the state attorney's intervention during the hearing in the court case between the Sami reindeer herding community Girjas, from where Janok's grandmother came, and with the Swedish state, the Gällivare Lapland District Court, from June 2015. And this is the text that you will hear at the beginning of this video. And below here you'll see the lyrics for the first verse that we will play up to. Apologize for stopping in the middle. As several scholars have written about the importance of joik and in creating an awareness of environmental thinking, and one is Tina Ramnarine, and her research has highlighted the principal features of yoik and the ways in which this vocal genre has been implicated in environmental thinking, including Indigenous concerns and ecofeminist politics. And in this song, I hope you've heard how the combination of this very, very rousing, militaristic kind of drum beat really does call to mind a kind of a collective experience, not to mention the actual visual imagery, of course, that goes alongside with it, connecting nature and the ideas of place and identity, all in one pop video. This quote from Yanok came from a TED talk she gave in 2011, where she said, "I don't want my children to read about me in a museum." In Yanok's music and music videos, which are shared on YouTube and viewed by thousands around the world, they've helped raise awareness to the plight of Sami communities, to those situated on the far corners of the world. Her songs have become one of the most important elements in stories about Sami cultural survival in the 21st century, and important factors in the continuing transmission of Sami music and yoiks include things like recordings, festivals, competitions, digital audiovisual media technologies, in particular YouTube, as I mentioned, as well as pedagogic texts and formal education projects, such as including yoik in the music curriculum of some, but not all, Nordic music academies and curricula. Yanok's eco-critical music connects with others around the world to a wave of Indigenous activists and environmentally conscious artists who are using their music and the video sharing platforms like YouTube to call people into action. In particular, a recent wave of songs have stemmed from the Indigenous-led movement to stop the North Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock, which many people have mentioned already, and of course, which Sarah Marielle and her family have visited twice. In one particular song, a very pop-oriented track by Taboo of the Black Eyed Peas, who has Shushan heritage, he wrote the song Stand Up, Stand and Rock in 2016, meant to serve as both a tool to promote awareness as well as an anthem for Indigenous people across the country who had united in the effort against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Cultural pride stems from the recognition of these Indigenous and First Nations people through the act of pop songs, as well as a sense of solidarity that comes from collaborating on a project like this with a shared goal. For Indigenous peoples across the globe, the mere fact that they exist today is an act of resistance. Every generation since the time of contact has gone through various attempts of assimilation or genocide. Indigenous history has been largely left out of textbooks, but through music, their stories are being heard by the world. Indigenous protest music isn't just about anti-war ballads either. Telling Indigenous history through song has been integral to the re-education of the masses. From storytelling folk songs to anti-war anthems, to spoken word and hip-hop, to music that sparks our spiritual awareness. The Canadian trio, A Tribe Called Red, released their third album, We Are the Hallucination, in 2016. The album called for a connection and social justice and raised Indigenous voices to new heights with collaborations from around the globe, fusing electronic hip-hop, dancehall, reggae, and dubstep with First Nations music, especially vocal chanting and drumming. The band's name is both a homage to the 90s socio-political hip-hop group, A Tribe Called Quest, as well as a reference to their First Nations roots. Here's a brief excerpt from their track, Ally Nation.
The hallucination.
And again, apologies. You hear in this track, obviously, a tribe called Red, and they have special guests, including Tanya Tegek, who is a well-known Inuit throat singer and a fearsome elemental performer, which you could hear there's beautiful throat singing in the background towards the end there. This brings me to my next example, which connects both Indigenous thinking with colonization or decolonization. And this is the work of the Los Angeles-based Indigenous hip-hop punk fusion group Atlan Underground, who released their debut album, Decolonize, more than 20 years ago. But somehow the messages behind this and all of the band's subsequent works remain the same, from calming poetry that speaks to spirituality and connection, to the raw and intelligent retelling of history, to angry testaments of the mistreatment of native peoples and injustices to Earth. Atlan Underground take us through these emotions, and they powerfully state, we didn't cross the borders crossed us. Here is a very brief excerpt from their song now. Again, terribly sorry to stop this. I'm running very close on time. I'm going to just play 3 more examples in this very short time that I have left. The first will bring us from this sort of history of decolonizing to somewhere closer that's home for me. And this is Ireland's history, which is, of course, steeped in both colonization but also in music. And this is sort of signified in the fact that our national icon is the Irish harp, which has been used as a political symbol for Ireland for centuries, from early back as the 6th century. And since 1922, the Irish harp has appeared on coins and coat of arms as a representative of the Republic of Ireland. The song that I'm going to mention next is a traditional Irish song that is in Oscuelga, in the Irish language, originating from the 18th century. And it became known as a rebel song in the early 20th century, sung by Irish volunteers during the 1916 Easter Rising. The most significant 20th century Irish uprising against British colonial rule, which marked the beginning of the Irish Republic as we know it today. And this song tells the lyrics in a ballad form, a very simple form, tells the story of Granuaile, the Irish pirate queen, who was the symbol of Ireland and Irish resistance. The lasting legacy of this song, it's still performed today by Irish artists across a range of genres and styles, from ballad groups like the Clancy Brothers, the Dubliners, the Wolf Tones, to sean-nós singers, as well as more popular singers like John Spillane and Sinead O'Connor. And I'll sing just this brief first verse for you to give you an idea of what it sounds like. Shade of van balein var begrach to ve in even the di havra I shall of merlach it to deal tell leshna galev oh rose shade of a hawalya oh rose shade of a hawalya oh rose shade of a hawalya and nisher haktan tauri. And now that the summer is coming home is the last line of that verse, which feels very apt on a lovely sunny day like today. And lastly, I'm going to squeeze in a last example. We move now back to 2016 to Anoni, who is a British-American singer, formerly lead of Anthony and the Johnsons. In her 2016 album, Hopelessness, this album is known for its critical approach to the current political climate, where even the outgoing Obama administration was not immune from criticism. The album is full of haunting songs about her disappointment in Obama, drone bombs, surveillance, and climate change. In one song, which I'll play in very briefly, it confronts the price we pay for safety from terrorists and brings us, via a very unlikely twinkling love song, into contact with the casualties of US war on terror. In an interview with BBC, Anoni describes this perspective, saying that the song is a love song from the perspective of a girl in Afghanistan, say a 9-year-old girl whose family's been killed by a drone bomb. She is kind of looking up at the sky, and she's gotten herself to a place where she just wants to be killed by a drone bomb too. The lyrics, "Let me be the one that you choose from above. After all, I'm partly to blame," point to the complicity that we all have in advancing these kinds of wars. So drone bomb me, blow me from the mountains and into the sea. In this video, we see Naomi Campbell taking a position that is immediately recognizable for many of us familiar with the horrendous photographs released after the declassification of the US war on terror material. These photographs the US Army took in Abu Ghraib, particularly this particular photograph, the hooded man, became the most memorable image from the war. Was not taken by a professional, but a US Army Staff Sergeant. Even before the war began, many questioned the motives of the American and Allied governments for the invasion that toppled Saddam, but nothing undermined the Allies' claim that they were helping bring democracy to the country more than the scandal that this photo ensued. All the more incredible was that they took thousands of images of their mistreatment, humiliation, and torture of detainees with digital cameras and shared these photos widely. This particular photograph was the most widely disseminated, partly because it was, tragically, less explicit than many of the others, so it could be more easily shared in mainstream publications. The man with outstretched arms in the photograph was deprived of his sight, his clothes, his dignity, and with electric wires, his sense of personal safety. And the pose, it seemed deliberately, unnervingly Christ-like. The liberating invaders, it seemed, held nothing sacred. After all, I'm partly to blame. These songs serve to implicate us all for our demands of safety from terrorism and the violence it brings to our imaginary 9-year-old girl. And finishing up now, because I'm totally out of time, we've come full circle and we return to issues of environmentalism and climate change. In 2012, the World Bank released a report intended to shock us into action, warning the world that we are on track for a 4 degrees Celsius warmer environment, marked by extreme heat waves, declining global food stocks, loss of ecosystems and biodiversity, and life-threatening sea level rises. Anoni, in another track on this very same album, has a song called It's Only 4 Degrees, and it attempts to sonically echo the World Bank's report to shock us listeners into environmental action. Set against thundering drums, harsh trap beats, and lush orchestral strings, the songs sound like we're on the very edge of destroying the earth for future generations, while still, somewhat incongruously, feel incredibly danceable. We sing when speech fails. Much recent work in cultural sociology has argued that changes in our expressive forms are driven less by external factors and more by internal ones. It has to do with artists, fans, and the internal dynamics of the music industry. To answer these questions, then, I hope that this briefest of overviews has shown how protest music is still going on, but in ways different from the 60s and 70s, perhaps. The causes are perhaps economic and technological, changes in the music industry in terms of demographic, distribution, monetization. These have affected what music gets made, but also what music gets heard. More people around the world discover and listen to music over the internet, and protest music has always largely been DIY or participatory endeavor. Cyberspace has made this even more so with the proliferation of digitally enabled remixes, mashups, and cut-ups, as well as contrafacta. And such forms rely usually on copyrighted material that are not meant for commercial distribution. Despite the spread of democracies and neoliberalism, the world has moved to a situation in which artists like Anonhi's hopelessness are rife. Or in W.B. Yeats's term, to pick an example closer to home, things fall apart. The center cannot hold. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity, and with that intensity often expressed in music. And with music, I hope, comes hope, and maybe even solidarity on the issues that we all face today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Anya, for that really powerful overview. Much appreciated. And with that, I'd like to invite us to move on to our next speaker today, Paulina Fyodorov, who's just descending the stairs now, who's going to talk about her work in river guardianship, ecological restoration, and the various methodologies that she engages with in order to do that. So may I ask you for a very warm round of applause to Paulina, please.
Is it on? Okay. Tjörve, Porpäivi, hello to everybody. And I would like to also on my behalf to thank you for having me here, and thank you for all the previous speakers for sharing your world and your insight. This has been really unique to listen to. I will begin a bit far away with a long quote from a time when scientist text used the word lap as a synonym for the word Sami. The text has been peer-reviewed and published before I was born, so I will read it as it is, not as we would wish us to be referred as. And let's see where we end up. So the quote begins. In spite of the sparse and inaccessible source material concerning burial in trees or on platforms, it would be seen that in general it refers to the eastern lapse, just as it is true of burial on or above the surface generally. The details provided by Major von Oeger about the Swedish lapse refer to the 1820s. Should a lap die in the summer, he writes, the laps have a very strange way of burying the dead body. They carefully remove the entrails from the body, smoke it, and then hang it in the sun, for then it is easier to carry and transport, so they say. Malm, on his behalf, writing at the beginning of the 1840s, says on the lapse of Utsjoki that if a death occurs in the course of a journey in the summer, the body is placed in a coffin which is made of on the spot, or it is wrapped in a reindeer skin. The body is then suspended in a tree so that wolverines cannot get it. In October or November, the body, which has now then been dried by the wind, is taken down and taken to the churchyard. The Lapps commonly use the branches of trees as storage places in different ways. If, for instance, a Lapp caught a large fish he didn't want to take with him, he would hang it in a tree to dry and fetch it later. Lapps used to dry the bodies of foxes by hanging them on the trees, hung so high that wild animals could not reach them. It is therefore natural that the Lapps should deal with human bodies the same way. In attempting to obtain a picture of early burial customs among the Lapps and other northern hunting and fishing peoples, interesting parallels are provided by hunting rites. Taking care of and preserving the bones ensured the continuation of the species. A new animal grew from the bones of the dead one. Among the Scott Lapps, it happened that the fish were eaten in such a way that the bones remained whole. The skeleton was thrown back into the water so that a new fish would be born of it. From the bone of a human body, a new person would be born the same way. Certain burial grounds belonged to certain families. The corpses of the people who had died in other places were transported to these family burial grounds. Even when communal burial grounds were used, the dead of each family were kept separate from each other. In other words, each family had its own specific burial area. It is natural that each family should have its own burial ground within the boundaries of its own lands. Here might be detected a parallel to the separate shrines which each Skolt family had been proved to have. Naturally enough, these shrines also lay on the family's lands. Each family had its own cult and had its own shrines or holy places. Islands clearly demarcated and removed from human habitation or migration routes offered special advantages to our shrines too. In early Lapp literature, there is often reference to a fence of reindeer antlers, of a pale surrounding the shrine. No woman was permitted within the limits of this fence on pain of death or other punishment. Any quarry taken within the fence area had to have certain parts sacrificed to the god of shrine. It may therefore be assumed that the fending off of the shrine was a very important factor. Sacrificial groves were fenced off, and likewise in the manner in which the dwellings of the dead were isolated by means of a protective fence. End quote. In this way, writes the Finnish professor of ethnology, Nils Turo, in 1971 about the burial custom of the Skolt Lapps, or the Skolt Sami, or Samlas, as we call ourselves, my people. The customary about my people's conceptions about death, resurrection, cycles of life, and customary law governing and ensuring the new arrival of the salmon, the deer, the reindeer, the bear, the trout, the dipper, the domna, the fekla, the kiureli, the piume, the vasko, the elet, and the vassi, among others, has been made accessible to other peoples by literally opening the graves, both above and under the ground, digging up the bones, making inventories of the bones, examining bones, and interviewing the living relatives of the deceased, the relatives who were only having their other food in the grave during the time of interviews. Most of the interviews for the study have been made in näätämöskoltsida, njautamsiite, Sami self-governing unit meaning both the people and the area, which in 1970s was already totally be taken over, first by the Finns, the Kvens, and then by Norwegians. The informants seems to be having consensus that their world does not resurrect and reborn anymore, so it is all the same to share the information outside the kin and to stop the cycle there. There are several different categories of ownership in indigenous traditional knowledge. There are knowledges that are owned by the people, such as a language, for example. Some knowledges are owned by a family, such as certain macro vocabularies for family areas. And then are knowledges owned by individual persons, such as certain events and responsibilities concerning the family area. The latter category can be such that the transmission of a particular knowledge is done only once, and to certain family member, from a mother to an eldest daughter, from a father to an eldest son, for instance. I would like to comment to Sturo's writings that it has been our cosmology that has always guided our society, not a religion. What Sturo names to be gods or shrines have different names and different backgrounds for interpretation for us. When we discuss our basic concepts of what is a human being and what is a human being's place in the world, it is not a religious discussion. Our cosmology has been successful in its main core until the last century, protecting our lands and waters, which the other cosmology that has overrun and replaced us has not been that good of. And why does it look like cosmology does not matter, asks Asta Balto, one of the most respected Sami scholars. She has spoken and written about the ways how the Sami decorated and dressed in especially bright and beautiful colors for moving to the summer lands from winter pastures, so that the reindeer would have more joy of watching us. Is this valid knowledge? And how do we integrate our cosmology to the management of natural resources? Quote, "The land heals a human being. I feel the joy of the land in my body. She feels the joy of the land in her body while she collects the rubbish away." End quote. How do you contribute to your own collective, to your own family land, which is formed from the dusts of your kin? How do you contribute to your family land you no longer have access to? The term decolonization has been rightfully criticized because it sets the colonization in the middle of our focus. It is self-evident that we must know our history and especially what has happened, but the focus needs to be shifted to the very questions: what do we want now? What do we do now with our damaged selves? We live in the middle of highly human-altered environments and realities. The atom has been split, the DNA has been modified, the earth has been drilled almost to the core just to see what is in there. Geoengineering, aka modification of the climate, such as solar radiation management, which seek to reflect the sunlight, by example, using stratospheric sulfide aerosols, have all already taken place, among so many other processes that would have been a dream in 1933 when Nils Sturo was born and the world was facing so different questions than now. And when our physical reality is being altered, modified, or destroyed every day, our perceptions and knowledges about the world start to alter, modify, and destruct. It is not certain anymore, do I exist? If I exist, do you share the same reality with me? Is there a reality? Is that just a conceptual relic as any kind of absolute, whether it would be a law or a truth? Have these alternations altered the existence so much that what used to be the natural law or nature's law does not exist anymore? Is there a reason to decorate ourselves for the reindeer when our relationship with the reindeer has changed so much during the last 40 years? Would that be just an imitation of a cultural practice now empty for us, or is there still a relevance that can be turned back to? When the laws that ensure the eternal cycle, everything comes always back, is broken and the bones are not let to be reborn, instead stored in research chambers, the solution is not to forget and abandon the knowledge why have we been doing like this for millennia and what is the reason behind it, trying to unlearn seeing our ancestors as more childish and uneducated than us, bone by bone letting everything go back to the continuation so that the diseased can be reborn, the damage is undone. And the very same way the reindeer have always been watching us, the colonized have always been watching the colonizer and asking, analyzing, why is this happening? With this rather long introduction, I would like to go to the topic of my speech today on river guardianship, ecological restoration, and a few words about camera. This map over there shows the 7 Skoltsami Siidas on the year 1900. As you can see, based on the dots describing settlements, all the Siidas were still inhabited by Skoltsami, even when all the other Siidas withering away, than Suenil in the middle, which was the last of all Sami Siidas to continue the traditional self-governance until 1944. My grandparents are from there, and after the Second World War, forcibly located to the traditional winter pasture lands to another Skoltsami, Njautam Siida. As you can see from the map, Kirkenes is on Skoltsami lands, on Paatsiok Siida's area. So my family is a second generation immigrant to other Skoltsami group lands. And we are facing a real harsh reality. We have no elsewhere to go. Mining both sides of the borders, Norway and Russia, and nobody wants us as a collective. So we have no other choice than to try to form a living relationship with these old new lands as soon as possible or perish, and gather the crucial bits and pieces for survival from all possible sources, including scientific texts. As a part of that process, we have started to re-establish the Skoltsida self-governance in a practical manner, bringing back traditional water management practices to River Njautam, Neiden River, as a climate change adaptation strategy. Acknowledging that in current situation, we can do little about the fate of the salmon as it leaves the Njautam River, the Neiden River watershed, to spend part of its life cycle in the Barents Sea. We are determined to do everything possible for salmon as it returns to the river. To increase the salmon's chances of survival, we are restoring old spawning sites and conducting controlled catches of predator fish such as pike and burbot. Having a say in how the river's salmon stocks are managed is essential if our traditional fishery is to flourish and prevail in the face of climate change. Over the past 7 years, our team, consisting of reindeer herders, fishermen, scientists, and artists have we gathered traditional knowledge and observations on how land is changing in a changing climate. Combined with weather diaries, catch diaries, interviews, temperature diaries, and measurements of heavy metals on water, we have focused on observation about introduction of foreign species to the area, analyzing the status of known spawning sites and place names as a source of valuable information. Special interest has been rest on site-specific macro vocabularies and traditional law practices on the river, based on observations and analytical work both from the traditional and scientific knowledge's point of view. The first physical watershed restorations have begun on autumn 2017, which the artistic team is documenting. We are currently restoring the watershed areas in where the past land use, such as logging and burning of the land, man-made water flow alteration and construction of roads and bridges has led to loss of spawning sites for salmon, trout and other fishes. By reintroducing old spawning sites, we are giving the salmon and its relatives more possibilities for survival with extreme heat waves. In year 2013 and 2014, parts of the rivershed in Vainosjoki dried totally. Especially this kind of record high temperatures which we are witnessing here today, now, in early spring, that vaporizes the water way too high to be raining down far away from its own natural cycle, drought that follows in autumn, and introduction of new algae are the new normal. The freshwater mussel has disappeared from the river nearly totally. July 2012, our team took up a picture in Lake Opukas, the Owl Lake, which has eventually become science. The northernmost observation of Potosia cuprea, the scarabid beetle, new species are moving in. The same summer this observation was made, we also gave back the bones to the river with my father, who I would like to acknowledge as the leader of the work. The work is led by Skoltsami and the scientific organizations. Snow Chase Cooperative is creating a very different way of exchanging and changing knowledges from Sturos days. We can only undo the man-made damages. The river needs to find her own way to cope with changing climate. We must just not interfere her with this extremely demanding process. The collective memory on how the Sida system really functioned is just a stone cast away with the Skoltsami. People who were born to its absolute power are still alive. The memory has not yet morphed into texts, recordings, archive materials. It is, yes, scattered, hidden, deep frozen when it had to do the active banning. But it is still a functioning work memory. Too little used, but still functioning when let to function. And I will stop here. I think I have one video, but I don't think I will show it. And if you, because it's a bit, it's already old news. I don't want to show old news. I was so inspired by the music videos by Tribe Called Red, so I don't want to show old stuff. So I will show you new stuff in a couple of years. So, and I must say that this work that we are doing, we are getting good funding, and it's an art project that is art is giving funds for all this kind of work. So thank you.
So, Gitu, Paulina, thank you very much for allowing us to catch up with your very important work. And I'd now like to invite our next speakers, who I can't actually, oh yes I can, there they are. Sara Maria Legaup Beski and Eva Maria Fjellheim are going to talk to us about their very specific struggles and fights and the relationship between them. So please give a very warm welcome to both of them.